If you walked away from your business for 2 years, would it be stronger when you return? That's the question that inspired generations of founders to build something that lasts. Running a business takes more than hustle. It takes a leadership team that anticipates what's next. A system that's well-oiled, self-correcting, and capable of growing beyond the founder. CBC Talks is about building businesses that don't just survive, but thrive.
Welcome to another episode of CBC Talks. George, thank you for joining us today. When the Creative Business Council has focused on building leaders through the operations pipeline to give them the business acumen to be able to run large enterprises, you would be an example of someone that is held at the highest level of an example of what kind of business acumen and business leadership looks like to bring together all of the disparate parts. So thank you for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
Today's guest is someone who understands the highs and lows of career transition better than most and has turned that hard-won experience into a playbook for others. George Murray is the general manager at Celestica, where you lead the global operation in one of the more complex supply chains in the world. But beyond your executive leadership, George is an author, a mentor, and passionate advocate for professionals navigating change. And your book, Hired, Cut Your Career Search Time in Half, isn't just a guide to landing a job. It's a blueprint for taking full ownership of your professional journey, reclaiming your confidence, and showing up ready to win. George, what did I leave out?
That sums it up really well.
George, I had a really awesome opportunity to actually read your book, and I found myself kind of grinning as I went through it. Because in alignment with some of the authors that you cite, Jocko Willink was one of the ones who stuck out to me. Your background in the military and your emphasis on personal accountability really stuck out to me as a grounding, really valuable insight that anyone could take away from. Tell me a little bit about how you got to where you are and why does that quality come through so strongly in your writing?
Yeah, I believe the military really taught me a lot about leadership and taking accountability. It's kind of like the intestinal fortitude situation, right? Mm-hmm. There's always an obstacle. There's always more than one way to get around it. And especially during transition myself, I found that others that I talked to weren't taking the accountability needed, and they were taking a lot longer in their transition and wondering why. And so, I really ramped up what I knew and found by talking to others who were in job transition to benefit myself. So, for example, the average person networks in job transition between 12 and 15 a week. So I knew I had to do more than that, and I got up to a point where I was doing 30 a week for more than 6 months, and people tend to really bulge their eyes out and, say, well, that's a lot, and I'm not sure if I can do it. Well, you're right. If you don't think you can, then you won't. But if you want to, you can build up momentum over a few weeks. And, before you know it, from 3 becomes 7, 7 becomes 15, 15 becomes 20, et cetera.
One of the things I've loved is your book. The very first chapter really talks about taking it seriously, like it's a job.
Oh, yeah.
And it's crazy how many people, right now, the job market's a little weird. There's a lot of people that have been jettisoned from their corporate careers and they're finding themselves wandering around a little bit.
Yes.
You have landed in this incredible role. So I don't understand. You must have always known what you were going to do along the way, right?
No. It's never black and white. I think a lot of things that I put on myself, others kind of struggle with. You put a time fence on it. Everybody's like, well, I think, right? But they don't really put a time fence. Put a time fence that says, hey, I need to be in a job 4 to 6 months. Then you need to turn around and put plans in place. There's going to be forcing you to do things that you might not necessarily do. Like my first job transition, cold calling CEOs. I would have never done that, but that was based on a dare that somebody told me, hey, those things do work. And ironically enough, I picked 10 executives in the Minnesota area, and we're talking about executives that were making really large money in revenue, really busy on billion-dollar companies, like Pat McHale. He was the CEO of Graco at the time. He's since retired or whatever. And just the quick responses I got were just outrageous, right? Just beyond my thought. I felt that, maybe 4 out of 10, but 9 out of 10 actually called me back within a week.
Did you feel like your path was planned, or did it unfold through key moments and opportunities?
I think the latter. I think the fact is part of the process in which I talk about in my book is that you have to look over your last 3 or 4 weeks. I always did it. Everything was a regimen. It's like the military, right? Everything's a process. You got to figure it out. And a lot of things in job transition, people struggle to figure out because each day may feel like a month. Before you know it, 3 months go by and you don't have anything to do. So I think the fact is that you have to just figure out a path and be able to be flexible. But then you have to look back and say, what's working for me the last 3 weeks? What's not working? Let's stop that. And then just kind of do something different, like cold call, like write emails to people that you haven't met, maybe part of your alumni section on LinkedIn, et cetera, right?
One of the things that struck me as really interesting about your book is I was thinking about how the way you take your job, you took the job transition, you took it really seriously from a systematic perspective of, okay, what's our target, what's our results, and then let's work backwards based on what do we need to do into that. When you get into a job, that probably doesn't translate at all, right? You just wait to be told what to do.
Oh, no, that definitely transitions. Definitely, especially in my line of work, I'm very, very hard on myself. So I don't really need bosses to tell me I'm doing a good job or a bad job, especially a bad job, because I already know what needs to be worked on. I'm probably the hardest critic of myself. And so I think the fact is that you can take a lot of that back into the workplace and you can apply it. Like I tell people, when you get into a new role, you want to make sure that you network inside a company, right? So you just don't, network with a boss, but you also network, vastly among your peers, because there's strength in numbers in any situation.
But if I'm an introvert, George, I can't, be networking all the time. I can't do that. If I'm at a company, like I'm supposed to just do my job, right?
No, I think, you'll definitely shift down in networking. You'll definitely not do 30 a week, right? But I think you can still at least have 2 or 3, like a morning coffee before work, maybe a lunch, maybe one meeting after work. And you can do this 3 times a week. And I always tell people, you want to keep top of mind. Part of the process, I say, when you're job transition is you're sending an email out to the people that you've met in the last 5 or 6 weeks, just to tell them, hey, a couple of lines, what I've been doing, and then also what I'm still looking for. So they still know you're out there because, life is busy and people, they're not trying to forget you. It's just life happens. So you get top of mind. Those people are networking. They might have met somebody in those 5 or 6 weeks, but it also reminds them of what you're looking for. I always tell you're creating cheerleaders in the workforce, right? To speak your name, speak your capabilities. And then when you land and you get in your role, you should do that at least twice a year. To all your network, just tell them, hey, this is what I'm doing. This is what I have been doing. And maybe you might be looking for, who knows, somebody to turn around and paint your inside of your house. And maybe one of your network friends knows somebody.
So one of the things that, let's assume someone listens to this and they're like, hey, this guy sounds pretty sharp. I should read his book because I'm in a job transition or I'm looking. You are probably one of the most well-versed right now to be able to talk about job transition. So when someone would come to you and say, George, can I pick your brain? Can I learn some more? What do you think they should be thinking about before they come to a conversation with you?
Well, I think the good thing is that they at least take a look at my LinkedIn profile, read up a little bit about me. There's definitely enough out there between my website, LinkedIn, and my own podcast I used to have a couple of years ago about job transition. Mm-hmm. It's still out there and available. It just gives people kind of a state so that they can speak articulate, and more importantly, is really understand what they need. That's one of the things I think we all struggle with, especially in the first couple of months, is I always call it the ask. Do you know your ask, right? Are you just networking with a bunch of people? Or are you strategically networking with hiring managers and people that can influence you getting hired?
I think it's your third chapter where you talked about getting your value proposition right.
Yes.
And you talked about getting really clear about not only what you are articulating, but really about what's your destination? What are you going after? You're just looking for somebody, please hire me. Or are you actually going with a real intention of, I want to go work for this kind of company in this kind of role? That's not common.
No. And actually a lot of transition groups and companies use the elevator pitch still. And it's really bad. And I've been in those, people go around the room and it's a standard one, right? I'm a COO with 25 years experience in MBA. You sound like Charlie Brown's teacher, blah, 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 right? As opposed to developing a value proposition and something that I say is unique and different, because it's got to be something that's not on your resume or not on your LinkedIn profile. So, for example, when you were talking about a CFO, right, very introverted, most of them, is that, try to figure out something that you've done. And one of these CEOs I was working with, he was an orchestra, or what do they call those guys that run the orchestra?
A conductor.
Yeah, a conductor, both in high school as well as college. And I'm like, well, you're still doing that. You're basically making all the departments sing in harmony in order to bring the right revenue and profitability. You should turn around and probably propose that. Then people actually get an opportunity to know a little bit about you that they can't read about. Hey, this person's a conductor, right? He's passionate about it. More importantly, he's taken that life experience and he's applied it to his own values and his own beliefs and how he runs his operation. Yeah, I mean, like mine, I use one of my military ones is, I'm a rappel master. Much like my military career, I drop into difficult situations, quickly assess the group, develop a collaborative strategy, and we execute the plan. We always exceed the bar. Do you know anybody that needs somebody like that? 30 seconds, right? It's not the elevator pitch that's supposed to be like 1 minute or two that turns into 5.
Gosh, I love that. So when I first heard that in your book, I was really intrigued. I chuckled at that, thinking that was so intentionally clever to give people that, oh, that's different.
Right.
So, George, you probably have your pick of opportunities right now. What is something that you would want somebody to take away from this, or something that would contribute to you and your journey?
One of the things, the things that a great networker that lives part of the time still in Minnesota is Greg Rye. And one of the things he told me very young in the process of transition is learn earlier than I did. The more you give, the more you get, right? And it's not going to happen instantly, but I can tell you it does work because every time that I've experienced a job transition or whatever, I have had more than an average turnout as far as support. And that's why it's also helped me land faster. The last time before I took this great opportunity at Celestica is that I reached out, I networked like crazy, and I was only out like 40 days in an unemployment rate that was, I'd say, a little less stressful than it is now, but pretty comparable. Unemployment rate was probably about 4%, and through networking, I got the opportunity.
So right now, you're available. People can come to you if they are looking for advising and they want support for their own career transitions. What's the best way for people to find you, get a hold of you, learn a little bit more? Yeah,
LinkedIn. Most of my books all have my phone number and email. And as a matter of fact, the year after my book was published, Hired, the first one, it was published in September of 2020. in January 19th, a fellow called me from Australia, and he had told me he bought my book through somebody he knew back in the States. Interestingly enough, I mean, I told the guy, I says, you literally made my year. I mean, I would have never met this person, you know? And for him to just reach out, he's like, I just can't believe that you leave yourself accessible. And I says, hey, I've been there. I've experienced the toughness of job transition, and it's an emotional roller coaster ride.
One of the themes that keeps showing up, so we run mastermind groups for general managers, operators that are coming up through the ranks, sub 150 employee companies, typically 15 to 50, like small groups. One of the things we find ourselves talking about a lot is the differences in a couple of roles. So as we transition to this portion of the conversation, I'd be curious about how you understand the difference between a vision for a small company of what it could do, and then perhaps the skill sets and abilities to now put that all together and put a plan together. What sticks out to you as I throw that out there?
Yeah, I think the thing is understanding the company's full capabilities, especially some of the companies I've worked with or at least have seen, is that they've kind of done what they've always done, right? And they haven't really assessed their full capabilities. They might be able to do only one vertical process, but if you give them the opportunity, they have the capabilities of creating 2 or 3 other verticals that will also reduce the risk when that particular vertical or product is actually in a low markets situation, right? Because everything's cyclical, or most everything is cyclical.
So what happens when that organization is just starting to grow flat? It's a little stagnant. Now it's struggling to figure out, well, this is what we always did, so we're fine, right?
Right.
But when sales start to pull, now what?
Yeah, what I see is that especially smaller companies, mostly the owner is, not only running everything day to day, but they're also running the sales, right? And the company gets to a point, let's say greater than 4 or 5 million, then it's like, hey, I need help. And they're probably the last ones to realize it because they just want to keep that control, right? So one of the great books, and I can't remember the title, but there was one lady that she had read another book, and she goes, when you get good at something and really know the process, 80% of what you know of that particular process, you should hire somebody who's skilled enough and then step away and learn more of the other thing. And to give you an example, she was in real estate. She started her first year at like 43,000, and like 15 years later, she was like $300 or $400 million business. It's just incredible.
She just basically backfill her role constantly.
Yeah, constantly. Every time she got to a point where she got it down pat and understood, she basically trained somebody up to speed and she moved on. So most of the time, owners don't do that. They keep it all bottled up, and that, gives them a heart attack.
So what's interesting is you've got a couple opportunities for folks who might be listening to this. In one side, you've got the podcast, a bunch of content you've put out, several books. The Hired is the one that kind of drew me to you, and we had that conversation. You also have the leadership coaching side of it. So tell me about some of the things clients might be wrestling with or dealing with that you would be perfectly primed to say, yeah, we should have a conversation because I can probably help you through that.
One of the things that has really probably excited me the most in the last 7 years or so is organizational development.
What does that mean?
It's just, making sure you've got the right people in the right seats, rowing in the right direction, but it's a lot more than that. I think you have to have a leader that's always constantly reflecting, and I'm mentioning leader and not manager. There's a difference, right? And even myself, I don't always get it right. I make mistakes, but I think the fact is, for example, you get into a meeting and the meeting doesn't go as well as you thought as a leader. Most of the time the leader will, most of the time the manager will basically say, okay, Sally did this and this is the reason why, or Fred did this and this is the reason why it didn't go. What a leader would do is basically go back to their office and really reflect and say, maybe there's something I said or I didn't say, or how I said it that didn't turn out.
George, that goes back to that personal ownership and that accountability again. If someone doesn't go through the military, how do they start to exercise that kind of mental patterning?
Well, it's interesting. When I interviewed for Celestica, there was a gentleman that interviewed me, had a great question. He had stated, he goes, George, I asked this of every candidate. He said, you're going to have 2 candidates you're interviewing for, let's say, whatever position you'd like. He goes, and on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the best, one person has a 9 on will and a 4 on skill, and the other person has the opposite. Who do you pick? So who do you pick?
The will.
Absolutely. He goes, but there are people that get it wrong. He goes, and those are the people don't go on.
Man, but I'm thinking about some of the leaders I work with. Some of them that may be confronting to hire someone that has more ambition than you, that they're going to be pushing up. They're going to be challenging the system. What do you do for an organization that has a tough time accepting or ingesting someone with that much energy of ideas and
I think you have to be very, very strong. And what I like to encourage in my teams is escalation, right? Transparency. I tell people that, my skin's probably thicker than tar out on the road. And you've got to be that way, right? And so you've got to let people vent. You got to let people, express their emotion and their concern. But then you've got to peel back and say, okay, what's creating it? What truly is? Is it just something that's happened at home that's caused them to come here? But there are also some things that you've got to also hold them accountable, back to personal accountability is just because somebody is lashing out at you doesn't make it right for you to lash out at them, right? You've got to basically be disciplined, be respectful, etc.
So, George, you've occupied the first in command seat. You've occupied the second in command seat and being the one putting all the system together. One of the things we end up talking about quite a bit in our groups with our GMs is that the emotional intelligence required from that second in command seat to deal with sometimes the challenges that might come from a visionary or the first in command, you have to be able to navigate those. And so what you're talking about sounds like a level of humility to be able to weather and take a punch. Why is that so necessary right now these days?
You can't be always serious. You can't always be demanding. It's just a different environment in manufacturing and operations right now. Back when I was starting, there was literally only 2 generations we had to deal with, right? Baby boomers and Gen X. Now we've got 5 generations. And they all don't, it was tough to, motivate 2 now to motivate 5 different. And it's depending on if they're the start of one generation or the end of one other generation. They may be kind of a little bit of both as far as their approaches and everything else. But what I can say is that, as a leader, and I have had several examples where I have learned as much from people as they have learned from me. An example, when I was out in Thailand, and we basically, within a scale of 36 hours, I had 6 factories underwater. And then had to communicate to the CEO, hey, this is not what I signed up for. Long story short, we had our operations up in 89 days, 6 factories, 1,500 employees. And that's just, asking a lot of questions, doing work, having people show you work side by side, right? I was out there painting and, scrubbing, fungus and everything else off of factory walls to get them ready.
As you look back at your career and the journey you're on, there's a lot of people who are looking to figure out, how do I end up in a similar opportunity, a similar space? Along your journey, would you give any credit to any sort of mentors, peers, moments, or opportunities specifically?
Yeah. Well, first is my aunt. She was an executive in Sikorsky Aircraft. She knew Igor Sikorsky. This is way before United Technologies purchased them. And she was probably the first lady that broke the glass ceiling, even before the glass ceiling was ever termed. So she's motivated me a lot and helped There's also, I would say I was blessed right out of the military to work for a great leader and still talk to him today. And it's been probably 35 years, is Bob Simpson. He was the general manager at TRW Automotive. And he had the knack, even though never serving in the military, would talk to me like I was in the military because he knew that, hey, this is going to work, right? Wouldn't talk to anybody else that way, but he's like, hey, George, I think this is going to work. And it did.
Can you articulate that? What's different about when you talk with someone in the military?
Well, I think
with a background in it?
Well, I think the fact is, you can't beat around the bush, at least for me. It's one of the things I tell people when I introduce. I said, I've got a couple of strikes against me. First of all, I'm from the East Coast, so I'm direct. Then I was in the military, so I'm really direct, right? Because you literally have, in war, you probably have less than 5 seconds before you're going to be, killed. And so, and been there. And so, that's kind of my overall view. I have had a lot of DISCS assessments, and they've all pointed that, I've really topped out in the directness of it. Sometimes maybe to the extreme. And I always tell people, and I'm open to it. It's like, if it's too curt, it's too short, you feel that you're being kind of interrogated, then by all means tell me, push back, because I'll adjust. And I think that's one of the things a leader needs to do, is to adjust their leadership style, right?
Yeah, it's interesting. One of the conversations that's come up recently is we've been working with a woman who's in a leadership role, kind of begrudgingly, but that's kind of how leadership works sometimes. And she has been working with the leadership team and has been hesitating. And one of the things that we started to do was to have her articulate how the business is structured, how it puts together, how the systems are dependent on one another. And once she was able to start to articulate that, she then built models and tools to go back to her company and back to her leadership and say, here's the situation we're dealing with. When you're thinking about what starts to give confidence or allow people to be able to manage up and say, hey, I think there's something we're missing here, what kinds of things do you think people should be thinking about as they're going through their leadership journey right now?
Yeah, I think the first and foremost is be yourself, because everybody else is taken, right? I think a lot of times people think that they need to change. And this is also through, interviewing and for jobs and everything else, as people get desperate and they try to change their approach. It's like, just be yourself, because you want people to hire you, and you want people to accept you as a leader, who you are. And I'm, one of the gentlemen that I work with, and the same gentleman that asked that question in an interview, is probably the best version of it. He's like, this is who I am. This is how I operate. If it offends you, by all means, let me know and I'll adjust. And I have high respect for him for it. Right. And I think that's the thing is that when you get to a leadership position, I think most of the time people, at least what I've seen, is they think that they have to be command and control, right? As opposed to, tell people what you need to happen and let them do it, or show them what needs to be done and let them go do it. Don't do both, because you basically handcuff their intuitiveness as well as their ability to figure out even a better way that you might know. So
you asked this question earlier, like, how do you distinguish the difference between being a true visionary versus someone who's just full of ideas?
Yeah, I'd say the ideas things is can, when somebody comes up with an idea, can they kind of walk you through the process, versus being able to see an obstacle, to see a challenge, like, a business. Let's say a business is like your earlier comment that hasn't been growing and it's been kind of flat for the next 3 years or the last 3 years, is to say, okay, do you understand why not, why, right? And more importantly, do you know what needs to happen? Might throw a lot of opportunities out there. You follow EOS, there's definitely a lot of owners that love to throw up opportunities, but EOS has got a process in which it's like, okay, we've agreed this quarter that we're going to do these. All the other ones are going to be tabled, right? And so I think the fact is that the difference is that, hey, I'm going to stay on this. I know that this is the process in which to turn around and complete, whatever the vision is. Like, for example, I want to grow my business 30%, 10% year over year. Let's identify the opportunities. Let's make sure we know all the challenges, and then more importantly, who's going to take them all. And it can't be all the owner, right? And a lot of times it turns out to be, and that's why they get frustrated and things don't turn out and they're flat every year. It's like, get at least some fractional help, right? And have somebody come in here and at least give you kind of an assessment of where you are and then where you possibly could be.
So I would be remiss if I didn't take the chance to ask about during your career trajectory and what you accomplished. You've had a lot of sounding boards. You've had great mentors. You've had great challengers. CBC is in the space of peer groups. What have you gotten out of being in peers of colleagues, advisors, and other sorts of leaders who are in similar roles?
I think the camaraderie that people have either experienced the challenge that you may be coming up to or going through, and they give you valuable insight that you may not have been able to come up on your own, and maybe cut your challenge or your challenge or your problems. I think also kind of the ability to get to know people beyond just what they do at work, right? And I think that also transfers back to work. It's getting to know people, We just had an event just a couple of days ago where we had two teams that, were, kind of struggling to kind of work together, although it was imperative them to do that, right? The fact is that, some were remote and some were not. And so it was kind of a we-they thing. We brought them together and we basically had an event, to socialize and get to know people on a different level. And all I had told them, I said, guys, we just have to understand the two basic rules here that we're all trying to achieve is satisfy the customer with good quality product each and every time, right? And want to grow the business. That's what we're here for. So obviously there's going to be difference of opinions. We need to make sure that we talk those through. And then more importantly, we need to turn around, and if somebody is not carrying the load in which they originally agreed to, then first talk to them, right? That's, I think, also one of the challenges with people is that not a lot of people have conflict resolution skills. They have conflict avoidance. I'm going to go tell HR on Sally, or I'm going to go tell my boss on Jerry, or whatever.
Leave it to the East Coast guy and the West Coast guy to be able to spot that, hey, you got to be able to lean in sometimes.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
And you got to take it, even as your leader. I mean, I've been corrected by some strong-willed employees, even in the current role. And I highly respect people for doing that. I'm like, you're right. I apologize. I mean, I think that's the other thing, back to your point of humility. You gotta admit when you're wrong.
If you had to leave one charge, one challenge, or encouragement for somebody in a season end transition right now, what would it be?
Understand your day in the life, your schedule, your process. I think that's one of the things that people really, they just get up and, for whatever reason, they'll get up and just post jobs. And I'm sure you've seen enough LinkedIn posts saying, I posted, 1,100 jobs this month. And it's like, in order for you to secure a job, it's 3% average of securing a job through submission of resume. Nationally, it's about 78% securing a job through networking. In Minnesota, it's in the mid 80s.
Wow.
So, the Minnesota folks have really got a market on networking.
George, you're incredibly generous to offer up as an option for somebody who's looking. You're an incredibly generous networker, and thank you for that. The last question that I always leave with is, based on our conversation and based on your career and what you know, what should I have asked you about?
Maybe the other books. I write books because I'm really interested in something that's out there that I don't necessarily agree or I don't fully understand. The first book, of course, was my career journey and all the important information I was able to collect from some great people in transition before me. Second one was basically Ignite, Engage, Retain, was the book about all these posts at that particular time about there's a lack of employee engagement. And this is back to leadership. It's not that. It's the lack of leadership engagement with employees that you have lack of engagement. So I did a lot of research on that, talked to a lot of executives, et cetera, all around the world, with even the folks that I knew in Thailand and elsewhere. Third book was the Fearless Path, and that was basically through my own experiences of overcoming fear, right? And knowing that I think most fears can be overcome if you really understand why you're afraid of it, and then more importantly, developing processes to overcome them. I mean, one of the things I give great kudos is people that just kind of jump out of corporate America and start their own thing, right? And they're successful, and I've met a lot of folks like that. The fourth book was kind of all the way a full circle back to Hired. It was The Future of Work, right? It's that when I was growing up, there was only one traditional way. You went to college, you got a W-2 job, and there you are. Mm-hmm. And this goes back to multiple generations. The younger generations have so many more opportunities. They've got gigs, they've got fractional work, they've got all kinds of sorts of things. And the book talks about all those and then some, about how even people who are experiencing job transition in their 50s and 60s and, maybe applying some of that, maybe a portfolio career is your best option. And then the fifth one was Exceptional Leadership with an X. And that was really about my own Generation X in leadership, and how businesses could thrive with probably more Generation X leaders.
George, thank you very much for coming to speak with us today. It's another episode of CBC Talks. Appreciate it.
No, thank you for having me.
If this conversation is resonating with you, it's probably because you're the kind of leader we built the Creative Business Council for. Our peer groups are designed for owners and leaders who want more than just ideas. They want accountability, clarity, and the chance to sit at the table with people facing the same challenges. The Creative Business Council is looking for leaders like you. Sit in on one of our peer groups and see the difference for yourself. Just click the link in the description.